Hello again, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. We've got an interesting episode today. It's sort of kind of a part two. 2 weeks ago, I talked about my own house guns, the guns I keep around for home defense, and that was very popular with viewers and listeners, so I reached out to Will Dabbs. He's one of our favorite writers here at Guns Magazine, and I thought he would be an interesting guy to ask, since he's got everything from heavy machine guns down to 22s, see what he puts around his house to defend his castle. And Will had a lot of great ideas and some interesting things to say. But before we talk to Will Dabbs, here's a message from our great sponsor, 4 Patriots. Prepare for those just-in-case situations with emergency food kits from 4 Patriots. Their survival food kits combine great taste with long shelf life, making them perfect to stash away for any emergency situation. The folks at 4 Patriots set up a special page just for our audience, so you can get this week's special discounts and deals. That page is 4patriots.com/gunmag. Again, just go to 4patriots.com/gunmag for all the special discounts and deals. Well, good afternoon, Will.
Hey, brother.
I appreciate you taking time out from your hectic schedule, being a twice full-time gun writer, and you still do the doctoring stuff, and you've got more projects than 3 people I know. So I appreciate you taking time out to talk to us here on the podcast.
Always a treat. Sleep is for the weak, man.
I know you say that, but we're roughly the same age. At some point, it does kind of catch up with you, doesn't it? Or do you just ignore it?
Yeah, at some point, I'm going to have to pay for all this, but I'll burn my candle at both ends and deal with it later.
There you go. Well, my own doctor, we've talked that I've said a couple of times now, all that stuff they told you when you're younger, you're going to pay for the various youthful indiscretions and not taking care of yourself and living an adventurous life. Yeah, I get it now. So
that's the real deal, man. Absolutely.
Yep.
But if I could go back to myself back then and say, listen, stud, you need to stop doing this, it wouldn't have made any difference at all.
Exactly. That's the flip side of that whole thing. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. Like I said, this comes on the heels of our podcast 2 weeks ago, where I admitted I couldn't find a guest. Everybody was busy. You were busy, everybody I talked to. So I just thought, I'll just talk about something I know, which was my guns I use in home defense. And it turned out to be wildly popular. And I think it's because it's so relatable, and the fact that though our readers feel like a family, our readers and viewers feel like a family, that it's one thing for either one of us as professional gun writers to say, you should carry this and this. But I think it's a whole other deal to go, here's actually what I got next to my bed. So that turned out wildly popular. And so I'm going to talk to a couple of our regular contributors and get their take on what they actually use rather than what they talk about. So, Will, you're in the hot seat today. The doctor is making a house call, and we're going to, and I'm very curious. So let's start with the big overarching question. What's kind of your general philosophy about home defense and how you approach it at Casa de Dabbs? Hard for me to say.
Well, I live way out in the middle of no place. So obviously your perspective on home defense weapons changes if you live in Manhattan, which is probably a bat and nothing else, or out in rural Mississippi, as I do, half an hour from town. All the deputy sheriffs are good buddies, but on a good day, it's going to take them 15, 20 minutes to get here. And so somebody's got to hold down the fort for a quarter hour until the cavalry arrives. And so and as you astutely observe, we get to actually get paid to do this. So I can fart with things like that and still call it work. So my grab and go guns is more than one. I've got about a half dozen, and each one has a certain niche, and it's all stuff that I've thought about and written about and pondered, and it's usually evolution, survival of the fittest. There have been a series of weapons that have led up to this and a series that have led up to that. And we can get as deep into it as you wish, but I have different guns for different missions. And having lived out here in the sticks for 20 years now, I've used every one of them at various times. For real, when the dog won't quit barking at 2:00 in the morning, or at one point, my wife and I were just sitting in the living room and glass broke downstairs.
Oh, wow.
I had expected the worst, but it actually was like a cat or a possum or something was crawling around and knocked a vase off the porch, and it landed on the back porch downstairs and exploded. But in each case, dependent upon the circumstances, dependent upon the threat, I have a different tool. So once again, we'll get as deep into this as time allows and you're interested in listening.
Perfect. Well, before we go any further, one thing that I kept hammering on during the podcast about myself, and I think you would agree, is this is a way to do it. It is not the way. I would never be so arrogant as to say that I'm the tactical master at all this and you should do it this way. So I'm pretty sure you kind of agree with that advice.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the cool things about guns. There's not this broad gulf between us and your typical 13-year-old girl, as you might think. And, all these things can be customized, personalized, color coordinated. Fortunes are made and lost in this gazillion-dollar industry doing stuff like that. Right there with you.
Exactly. Well, let's get into it. Let's start with the one room of the house that I feel is most important, because that's the place you're likely to have a sudden threat, and you're at an extreme disadvantage usually when you're in this room, and that, of course, is the bedroom. And myself, I've got a long gun and a pistol at hand. So what does Dr. Dabbs do?
Well, as I said, I've gone through a half a dozen over the years. I have kept a 1911 in the bedside table for a long time, and it obviously it's all different dependent upon kids as well. All my kids are grown, so it's just my wife and me now, and I'm not nearly so concerned about weapon security as I once was. When the kids were young, I was more helpless than your typical geriatric grandmother, just because I wasn't going to run the risk of having the kids get into it. But nowadays, having evolved over a long period, I've got an HK VP9L with a Trijicon red dot and a Surefire X400 light and laser on the bottom. It's big and bulky and heavy and not something I would want to carry, but I've used it within the last 5 days. We live way out in the middle of no place. We'll hear something bump out back. Sometimes it's a bird flying into the back window, or sometimes we got a bunch of raccoons and stuff, but I'll grab that thing. It shoots really well. I have maintained a suppressed pistol there as well. And obviously, if you're going to shoot something indoors, that makes all the difference in the world. But in this case, today at least, it's a VP9L that doesn't have a threaded barrel. But it's easy to shoot. It's heavy. As a result, recoil is really kind of a non-thing. Follow-up shots are easy. And a lot of people I shoot a lot, but I'm not a great shot. And so a lot of the micro red dot sights, I sometimes will have to kind of hunt around a little bit to find, which obviously is not going to do in a critical situation. But the full-size Trijicon red dot works great for me. It pops into my field of view every time I lift the gun up. I've trained with it enough that I'm comfortable. And so that's like a nice broken-in pair of boxer shorts. It's my grab-and-go gun. The VP9 is probably the most customizable grip in the industry. It's got, if I remember correctly, 3 grip panels on the left and the right, and then 3 back straps. And so if you can't figure out a way to fit that to your hand, you may not be human. But that's my grab and go gun, and it's probably been there for 3 years. And the only real issue with a suppressed weapon is just bulky. There's not a really good place to store it. Yeah.
And there's 2 points I wanted to hit right there. The first one is that we have very similar tastes in bedside guns. I've got a Glock 21 full-size 45 ACP with a light and an optic on it. But before we talk any further about that, safety, I've pointed out that my kids are adults now, and we have to worry about the grandkids. So I'm constantly worrying about that, because that's truly my biggest worry in life. I never want to be a victim of a crime, but even more so, I don't want to ever have to deal with any kind of tragedy. So
sure.
My latest acquisition is the new Streamlight lockable gun case, and I can't tout that thing highly enough. I just turned Tom McHale onto it the other day, and it's one of these, it fits in my bedside drawer perfectly, almost like it's made for it. It's got 5 buttons, and the thing I like about it is it's mechanical. It uses pins as opposed to a battery or LED or anything like that.
Sure.
Exactly. So it is mechanical. It could theoretically break, but this thing looks real simple. So they're not paying for that. And I've already put it in the magazine, so I don't owe them anything. I'm just telling you, if you want a bedside gun that you've got a good lock mechanism that would keep little hands away from it, that's a good one. The other thing that I was interested, I am not a fan of laser sights. I think they are misused mostly. However, I and many of my cohorts seem to put lasers, in addition to flashlight and optics and all that stuff, on home defense guns. So why did you choose a laser?
Well, if nothing else, because it didn't take up any extra space or bulk. And, last week when I went hunting around the house, it was probably 10 o'clock at night. It's pitch black dark outside. And the light is probably 1,000 lumens. I mean, it's quite spunky. It'll displace the darkness, but it's just as I'm sweeping that thing through the woods and around the edge of the house, it if nothing else, it just gives me a central focal point as I'm kind of trying to move like I mean it. Practically speaking, a little rocker switch on the back, so it's easy to cycle between the light or the laser or both. And in this case, I just keep it set to where both of them pop on at the same time. Practically speaking, my primary sighting device is still that red dot.
Right.
And, lasers were all the rage after the Terminator. Everybody wanted one. I did myself. I built mine from scratch back in the day because after seeing the Terminator in 1984, I had to have it. The laser the Terminator used was a high voltage unit that was not battery powered. He had a power cable that went down through his jacket sleeve. That was the only way they could make it work. But practically speaking, I agree. If nothing else, you can't find it in bright daylight. Now that we've got miniaturized red dot sights, it's a little bit superfluous. But I have one on mine because there's no downside to having it there.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about your long guns. I pointed out I live in town. I love my home. The only thing I don't like about it, I wish I was out on 50 acres, 120 miles from where the electricity ends, but that's not the way life worked out for me. So I'm in the middle of suburbia. So I've got plenty of rifles, but I don't have any of them really staged for home defense. I've got a couple in the closet that are ready to go if I ever need to grab them. But in my particular circumstance, I don't see a rifle as being my first choice for a long gun. So where I was going with that is under the bed is my Remington 887 shotgun, full size. It's a big gun, and it's under my bed. So you're out in the woods. You've got rifles, I suppose?
Yeah, I used to keep social guns handy. SIG MCX Virtus, which is a sinfully heavy rifle, but it just, you can't kill it. It was the basis for the new M7 Spear. It's a great rifle as long as you don't have to hump it a long distance, but I never touched it. In my case, I coordinate my weapons based on the threat, and the threat here is poisonous snakes. And so my grab-and-go gun is a Taxol X-Ring suppressed 22 with a loopholed 4-power optic and a 25-round magazine. I keep my magazine separate. I've done it long enough that I can get the weapon charged in the dark, but the deal. But of all the weapons that I've got, that one gets the most practical utility. I've written about it many times. I've killed 63 water moccasins since we've lived here. We've got a lake back behind the house, and tree huggers will say water moccasins are our friends, and they just are like big scaly bunnies and stuff, and I just don't buy it. I've seen a lot of people bitten by water moccasins. I don't want to join their ranks. And so I usually will kill 3 to 5 a year. And the way that works is I'm sitting at the dinner table and I look up and he's cruising along the lake. And at that point, time is of the essence. I've got to get down. I've got to get my rifle. I've got to get out and get to him. I'm usually barefoot. I don't much want to be wandering around in knee-high grass. So my instantly staged grab-and-go rifle is actually a superb sound-suppressed 22. I can shoot it without earmuffs, so I don't have to worry about hearing protection as I just grab the gun and go. And that thing and it's expensive. It's particularly the sound suppressor. It's more than $1,000. And before we get too deep into that, I have an incredible gun collection, but I have 2 full-time jobs. And one of my full-time jobs allows me to take guns and write them off on my taxes. So that's the only reason I get to dabble in this as deeply as I do and get some really high-speed weapons. I've spent my entire life getting to this point. But if you're a Trump or Gates or Bezos, then you could just write a check for this. But normal people can't. But this is a truly exceptional 22. It shoots like a laser. The best shot I've made with it was probably 3 years ago, and I killed a water moccasin that was almost 4 feet long at a range of about 50 meters while he was scurrying across the lake, and I shot his head off with a single round. And some of that was because it's a magnificent rifle, and a great deal of it is just because I was really lucky with that particular shot. As I said, I shoot a lot, but I'm not a great shot. But my standard grab-and-go rifle is that tricked out Taxol X-Ring 22, which shoots really, really straight. It's very reliable. And I've run it enough to where I can make it ready and get going from a dead stop in 20 seconds.
Yeah. I never thought about, when we're talking home defense, water moccasin defense is not a laughing matter living where you're at. So that's something I hadn't considered. We've got timber rattlers here in Indiana, and they're endangered. So I've only seen one in all my outdoor gallivanting. So if we see a snake around here, it probably somebody's escaped pet. So that's an interesting facet.
We built the lake from scratch, so there would not be any water moccasins back here had we not moved here in the first place. And over the years, I've stepped on one while I was out walking. That was a weird experience because through your boot, it feels like you stepped on somebody's arm. So you can feel it underneath your boot, and then it tenses, and it's incredibly muscular. And and that transition, I was wearing jungle boots at the time, but feeling like something soft and squishy that suddenly becomes super hard, it makes your skin crawl. And in that case, I was carrying a 22 pistol and blew that guy away at the end of my toe. Was very fortunate not to have shot myself in the foot. Mm-hmm. But my sweet daughter was going to walk down some steps wearing back behind the house in her bare feet, and I looked down just as her little pink foot was coming down on one of them that was coiled up. So, I love nature and all just like the next guy, but I don't have any use for water moccasins. I'll kill every last one of them. And as I said, it's been 63 since we lived here, and I haven't made a dent yet. There's still several a year. That gun used to be a shotgun, and I had a really nice Mossberg 940, which is a really nice auto-loading shotgun. But with birdshot, it would not reliably reach out more than about 30 or 40 meters. And there were a couple of them on the other side of the lake that I shot that, I saw 3 days later wearing an eye patch looking at me. So, I find that the 22 is a much more effective counter-snake weapon.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to your other home defense weapons. So are you saying you don't have any real long guns strictly devoted to home defense?
No, dude. No, I'm not saying that.
Oh, okay.
Just the 22 is right by the door. That's grab and go. But it depends on the threat. I've got that tricked out MCX Virtus with a, what do they call it? The Tango 6 optic on it, and it's an optimized modern sporting rifle. And I've actually shot that alongside an FN Scar and an M4 and a bunch of different rifles just to assess which one seems to fit me best, which one I can shoot most quickly, accurately at reasonable ranges, and that's my social gun, for lack of a better term. I've also got a Springfield Armory SOCOM 16 if the zombies show up in cars. And, that's loaded with 20 rounds of ball ammo, and that'll punch through anything that even I might imagine wandering up in the middle of the night with ill intent. I keep one of those Panzer Arms M4 shotgun clones, and I can't bring myself to spend $1,500 on Benelli M4, and this thing is a part for part copy, and it cost me $450. Kind of tricked it out with a sling that carries a bunch of spare ammo and a collapsible stock and a red dot sight, and it does everything that does $1,600 shotgun would for a fraction of the price. And then I've got a SIG MPX that began as a pistol with a pistol brace, And I drank the Kool-Aid when we had our amnesty for pistol braces, and I took everything that had a pistol brace on it and registered it as an SBR for free. I'm already on every list that the government's got, so adding extra SBRs does not intimidate me at all. But that MPX was actually an interesting project because it came with a pistol brace, and the little Velcro thing is just annoying. So once the paper came through, I started looking for a collapsible stock, and the original SIG stocks are available, but they're expensive. They're like $200 or $300. And once again, I'd worked for my money, and I'm not real interested in throwing it away. But I found a place in Taiwan that sells accessories for airsoft guns, and this is probably heresy in this environment. But I ordered. It's even got the SIG logo on the side, which is probably grossly illegal. But I've compared them side by side, the brace and the stock, and it's rugged, robust. It seems to be more than adequate for at least what I need. And the issue there is that shipping is horrible. Like to ship something from Taiwan is like $75-$80. And so I saved up and ended up buying about 4 stocks at once because the shipping's about the same regardless. And I got a couple of side folding SIG stocks, one of those little minimalist rigs, and then one of the full size versions with the polymer sliding bit. And then the stock on my MPX is similar to the one on a grease gun, so it slides in and out. So it looks cool. Looks like the standard military version. It is more than adequately rugged for what I would need it for. I'm not going to carry this thing out through the Hindu Kush. I just need it to zip around out back. But everything but the shotgun has a sound suppressor on it as well. So if I have to actually use this outdoors, they've all got a light, they've all got a can on them, so it's as comfortable as it can remain. Obviously, it's not about personal comfort, but it just makes it more tactically effective if you don't have to grab ear protection or worry about deafening yourself in the process. Yeah, that's the basic grab and go array.
So do you have any pistols staged around?
Yeah, let's see. I keep a Shadow Systems handgun handy. I've got an electric box by the front door, and the mechanical version sounds infinitely better because I always fret a little bit about if I have to grab it. It opens in an instant with my thumbprint, but I always worry, did I change the batteries? Try to do that on my birthday every other year, but who knows if I actually remember it. But Shadow Systems makes a fantastic pistol. The guys who make those things I've gotten to know some of them. They're really, really good guys. They come from the right place. A lot of tactical acumen goes into the design of those handguns, and they kind of hit a sweet spot. It's a nicer pistol than a box store gun, but it's not a boutique Gucci Glock that's going to cost you $2,000 either. So I keep one of those by the door. I rotate a Springfield Hellcat RDP and a SIG P365 as far as a daily carry gun. My 365 XL has a Trijicon red dot, but it's that RMRCC, the little micro red dot. And as long as I'm shooting that thing regularly, if I can shoot it about once a month, then every time I present it, it pops up right where it needs to be, and I don't have to hunt it. But if I go for about a month without shooting, it's like flying. If you go for about a month without running it, then I have to look a little bit to find that red dot. And I intentionally keep my Hellcat RDP as, I think, rapid deployment package, but that's the stubby version with the little compensator on the end. And I intentionally keep that one with iron sights. I mean, it will accept a red dot just like the SIG will, but I keep that one with iron sights because that's my baseline. It's got I've described it as a grinning cyclops. It's a little U-shaped rear sight and a luminous front sight. So that's the best grab and go concealed carry sight that I've found. And batteries aren't going to die, and I don't have to go hunt for it. So I have not fired my 365 in a couple of months. So I've been carrying that Hellcat for a while, and that's if I'm not reviewing something for a project. That's those guns are staged either in my vehicle or by the door in that gun box.
Well, now I have to ask probably one of the most loaded questions to Will Dabbs, MD. Will has got a incredible collection of firearms, and he does some manufacturing, I believe, too. So, Will, anything else unusual you've got ready to go in case of emergency?
Well, I've thought through that. The weapons that I just described are not the most efficient weapons in the collection. But at the same time, if I found myself before a local magistrate justifying the fact that some inebriated redneck tried to set fire to my house, and I was just trying to do my due diligence in preventing him from doing that, it seems to me that it would be a lot easier to justify Panzer Arms $445 autoloading 12 gauge than say something spunkier. And so, yeah, an MG34 or an RPD or an RPK, my favorite utility machine gun is actually an M16 receiver that I bought in 1987 for $600. And I've written about it several times. It was that my wife are the only two good investments I've ever made. In both cases, I got in on the ground floor. But over the years, that gun has worn a variety of parts kits. And right now, it is the heart of an actual HK416 that a friend of mine helped me source that was demilled from a state police SWAT team. And so once again, because I was at the right place at the right time, that receiver I couldn't afford to replace now. So it's $25,000, $30,000 now, but I bought it for $600. And I saved my pennies and bought this cut up 416. So now I have a transferable HK 416, just like the one that they used to kill bin Laden. But at the same time, I think standing before a jury and saying, why did you use this machine gun that with a sound suppressor on it that was used to kill bin Laden? That's pain I don't care to willingly embrace. So I've got more efficient tools, and some are at the house, some are at the shop. They're in various places, but they're not stage grab and go. They're very deep.
Well, I got to say that's a very pragmatic answer from a pragmatic guy, and it's about what I expected. Even though there was part of me thinking, I hope he's got a 50 cal pintle mount in the front room or something, but.
Well, if things really got sideways and I had about 5 minutes to prep, we could do better than that. The ammo is ready to go. I'll just leave it at that.
No doubt. And joking aside, that's a legitimate concern, and something that I raised with rifles is people want to use a rifle for self-defense, and I've got it sighted in at 300, and that's all fine and well. And in a situation where you live, you probably have a cleared shooting lane that you may need to reach out and touch somebody. But the thing that people don't stop to consider in a defensive scenario, how can you justify reaching out and touching someone at 300? Were they really presenting a threat to you? Now, if they had a sniper rifle, yeah, absolutely they did. But if they're standing there plinking away with a .22 revolver at 300 and you center punch them, you might have some splaining to do. So that just felt that I needed to embroider on that little concept.
Likewise, long-range shooting is fun, but there's no practical application for that outside of hunting. And, if the balloon really goes up, if the Russians nuke us, whatever, that's a different beastie. But as it is, if there's ever a possibility you have to answer for that shot, there's no set of circumstances that will ever justify a shot beyond about 20 meters. And, I'll withhold his name, but I met the gentleman at SHOT several years ago. Do you remember the story about the guy who had the shooting with the full auto Mini 14 at the HK plant?
Right.
That was as righteous a shoot as you could possibly imagine. He and his girlfriend are driving along. This road rage lunatic biker guy starts chasing him around, won't leave him alone, with murderous intent. And this guy is like 6'7". He's the good guy, incredibly nice guy. Once again, no need to discuss who it is, but it really makes a great impression. And the poor guy was just trying to get away. And the bad guy chased him all over the place and eventually chased him all the way to the HK facility there in Virginia. And the only weapon he had was a full auto Mini 14. And so he jumps up. He says, back up, back up, back up, go away. He's got a machine gun. I think he maybe even fired a burst in the air. And the guy just wouldn't slow down and eventually blew him away. And I think the bad guy maybe had a knife, but he was just crazy. And at the end of the day, that was awful for that dude. He had a horrible time in court. Eventually his employer kind of cut him loose. And, you read the details. Moss wrote a magnificent column about that years ago. And you just, as cool as it is to have an SBR or an automatic weapon or something like that, there's just the kind of people who manipulate the law, who do not feel the way we do, can make life absolutely miserable for you if you have a live shooting, even if it's justified. If you have something spooky and terrifying, if that looks bad in front of a jury, it's hard enough dealing with a situation like that without the added legal baggage that's a kind of a self-inflicted wound, because that's just my favorite example, because he is a really nice guy. He's squeaky clean, definitely one of the good guys, just not hard to justify that. And he used the only tool at hand to keep this guy from killing him and his girlfriend. At the end of the day, it cost him dearly.
Yeah. He came through it, but as you said, I think the key phrase there, it cost him dearly. So something to think about. Well, let's talk a little bit about where you keep your stuff, where your stash is. I've talked about, I have concerns about grandkids. No gun is safe unless it's unloaded and locked away, but trying to keep loaded firearms staged, I tend to put them in places where they're not easily accessed and not easily seen, those kind of things. One of the things I talked about, I'm a big fan of gun magnets. So different places that I can put the gun using that magnet. What are some of the things you've done to put your firearms where you might possibly need them, or with no kids in the house, you just leave them kind of sitting there?
Well, and your perspective and mine are the same. At the end of the day, I would much sooner be shot and killed by a bad guy than set up a set of circumstances where anyone could get hurt. So all my weapons are secured, even now with the kids gone. And when the kids were young, I had no resources. And I mean, when I say no resources, I went 5 years with 3 children and no paycheck. I had a gun or two that I had before then, but it was a come as you are party. And but at the same time, I had a simple wood shop and I was pretty handy with tools. And so when the kids were young, I made a little wooden box with a hasp on it, and I bolted that to the shelf in the closet. And so at the time, I had a SIG P226 that I bought in college, and I had that and a loaded magazine separately. And it was high enough to where the kids couldn't reach it. And even if they could reach it, I didn't have it padlocked, but it would take several intentional movements to get the gun and the ammo and then put it together. And yeah, at 2:00 in the morning, there were a couple times I actually had to go get it when I heard something alarming, and it took me a second to do that, but I practiced with it enough to where it went quickly. So at that stage in our lives, when we had absolutely no resources and couldn't have afforded a gun safe anyway, I mean, I had a little gun box that I kept all the long guns locked in, but the grab and go gun was just in a homemade box. And I was comfortable with that being safe. And we raised our kids around weapons. It was not, we intentionally excised the mystique from it so that there was not the desire to go, anytime they wanted to play with a gun, they just talked to me about it. We dragged it out. The boys could strip an AK-47 and put it back together blindfolded at 7. And that was part of our homeschool curriculum. But as a result, there was just no mystique to it. Right. Now you fast forward a while, and I have a gun that lets me get a gun. And so I have intended to write about this, but haven't. When we built the house, if you tap out the studs, find the space between the studs, and just cut out the drywall, you can build a box that drops into that hole, and then put a picture or something over it, and then you can find the hardware that you need to let that pivot or slide from Home Depot, and it's just a fun project. So I made those in rooms all through the houses that we have been in. With the kids as homeschool projects. And so that's where I keep my gun that lets me get to a gun. And that's so that they're handguns that I can get to readily, that are all far enough off the ground that if there's some little rugrat running around, they can't get to it now. And eventually, if God sees fit to bless us with grandchildren, I'll dial that back a bit. So, if nothing else, my wife would not tolerate my leaving live weapons laying around, but they're guns that are accessible. And then the long guns are tucked away. to where it takes a little bit of intentionality to get to them. They are behind a lock, but it's configured to where I can do that in a hurry, and have done it enough to where it doesn't take very long. But I can arm myself, the way I've written about it is I'm armed every time I'm not either asleep or in the shower. And that doesn't mean when I'm sitting around in my underpants typing, I've got a Glock stuffed in my drawers, but it does mean that I can get to a gun within about 10 seconds anywhere in the house. And at that point, that levels the playing field. If I have the tool at hand to deal with what needs to be dealt with. And once again, after 20 years, we've had a couple of sketchy dudes show up at the house. You don't get here by accident. There's got to be some intentionality to it. And some guys who, when confronted, just obviously were here not for the right reasons. And but at the same time, if within 10 seconds I can find a handgun, if the bad guys show up in a tank, it'll take me a minute or two to deal with that, but that at least makes me quickly until I can get the tools I need. So I've got all that iron, but it's the ones that are grab and go are just handguns, and as I said, there are 4 or 5 of them.
Well, that doesn't disappoint me. I never thought about assault by tank, but you've got that covered also.
Oh, yeah.
Well, in the brief time we've got left, any parting thoughts, anything we didn't cover, any words of wisdom to folks that are selecting weapons for their own home defense? Yeah,
the last 3 weeks have been hard on the world, and we so take this conversation for granted. Here I am talking with my good buddy Brent about if I want a handgun, because I live way out in the middle of no place, I'm going to be responsible for my own security for 20 minutes. I go to a gun shop and I buy that, and I have it. And I've got some buddies in Israel, and I was there in 2012, and back then the rules were different, and it was fairly easy to get a handgun. Lots of young studs wandering around in public with assault rifles who were home on leave, and apparently they just don't do that anymore. 1% of the population in Israel has a handgun. The rules are, the hurdles you got to go through to get that are enormous. You can only have 1 box of ammo, and that 3 magazines for your Glock 17 is just not going to go real far if you're being attacked by 2,500 bloodthirsty Hamas terrorists. And so that was hard to watch. And if there is a cautionary tale that we should take from that, we should appreciate what an amazing blessing it is to live in a place that respects its citizens enough to allow us the right to keep and bear arms for personal defense. Our nation is huge, and you were a career cop, and I carry a gun because cops are too heavy. And I love you guys, and so many selfless, wonderful, incredible people in law enforcement, but they cannot be everywhere all the time. The old axiom is they'll do a great job of catching the guy who killed you. And it broke my heart to see those folks faced with that type of threat without the tools to deal with it. And there is honestly absolutely no excuse for that. Those people are surrounded by horrible things all the time, and there's no reason why they should not have been availed of the tools that they needed to be something other than soft targets. And I hope in the aftermath that's going to change. But as Americans, we need to be thankful for the fact, we always complain, man, before 1934, when you could buy a Thompson cash and carry, that would have been so awesome. No, not really. We live in the salad days right now, and we need to appreciate that.
Yep. Great words, true words. And I will say, during my career as a police officer, that's exactly what I told folks is, we'll be if you're going to have a problem with a bad guy, call me. I'll come. I'll bring my friends. I'll bring friends of friends, and we'll do what we got to do. But you're on your own. And like you said, out in the country, you're probably on your own for 20 minutes. Even if the guys are running hard to get there, you're on your own for a while. And even if you live in the middle of town, you're still on your own for a little while. And unfortunately, I think society is more and more getting away from that. We want somebody else to take care of us. So it's great that we've still got good Americans that understand the things that we do have and understand the basic God-given right to defend yourself and your home and your family. So Will, well, again, you are the busiest guy I know by far, so I appreciate you taking out some time to talk to us and sharing a little bit of insight on how you defend your home. So thanks again.
Always a treat and a privilege, buddy.
Well, it's always great talking to Will Dabbs. I don't get to do it enough, and it's always interesting to hear his insights on what it takes to defend your home, even against water moccasins. Before we go, I'd like to remind you to check out our great sponsor, 4 Patriots, for all your preparedness needs and supplies. That's the number 4, the word patriots.com. And if you go to 4patriots.com/gunmag, you can see all the latest and greatest deals exclusively for the Guns Magazine podcast audience. That's 4patriots.com/gunmag for all the latest and greatest deals. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. On behalf of all my co-workers here at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat, reminding you, now get out there and get shooting.